discuss this latest possible case with ex-SAPS head profiler and author of the Profiler Diaries, Prof. Gerard Labuschagne. Thank you so much for joining us. Is it possible to say that there are specific hallmarks of a serial killer and anything you've seen about these 6 bodies found in the central Johannesburg building, does that suggest to you it's the work of a serial killer?
Well, I mean, the first thing to determine, obviously if you have a bunch of bodies found at the same time, but were they murdered at the same time? So that's the big question that would have to be determined through anything from your forensic pathologists who could give a commentary on the length of decomposition. And of course, if we're able to identify the young ladies and try and piece together when they last went missing and when they were last seen. So as soon as we have the incidences taking place, at least 2 separate incidences, then we can start to talk about a murder series if it's obviously the work of the same individual. It is not uncommon for serial murderers to have these close geographical areas where they leave their bodies, these sort of hunting grounds or body disposal grounds, although it's not necessarily within meters of each other. So that could fit in with what we see with serials. But the key issue would be, were 2 or 3 of them at least murdered at separate times? And of course, are they linked to the same individual? Now, as you said, he was only charged with 1, and that's not at all surprising. This case literally burst into the police's attention a day or so ago. It's not as if the arrest was the result of a long ongoing investigation. So it's not uncommon that you will just, for now, to keep him in prison, to avoid him getting bail, charge him with 1 where you have got pretty solid evidence. That doesn't mean you're not going to charge him later on with these 6 cases, all of them, or possibly even other cases that you maybe could link to him through further investigations, because you can never assume that these 6 are the only criminal offenses that he's committed. You'd have to look far and wide for attacks on sex workers, rapes of sex workers, people that didn't come forward and report what happened to them. And of course, by proper interviewing, and I hope they're going to get the necessary experts in to interview this guy, to find out if he couldn't confess to other cases that aren't part of the 6.
It's so interesting you say that, because there is an eyewitness. In fact, he's linked to this one case by an eyewitness account and CCTV footage. I don't see any DNA results, but as you say, it's a very recent case. Ultimately, is DNA linkage absolutely imperative for cases like these?
Not necessarily. I mean, obviously, DNA is a great way to link someone to an event, to place them at the scene of crime, so to speak, and then, of course, to link cases to each other. Now, if you have bodies that are quite severely decomposed, it hampers your ability to get what we would be looking for in this scenario, which would be DNA in the form of semen. So it's not essential. It is great when you've got it. There are additional complications. If they were sex workers, you might have mixtures of semen, which means mixtures of DNA. Might you have, booked them out, had consensual sex, and then killed them afterwards. So it is helpful for linking, but it's not an essential in this particular case. But definitely your other aspects, like who they were all last seen with, does he have items belonging to these victims? And of course, key to this is, again, like I said earlier, and this is imperative, to get the right people to interview this suspect after you've done your homework properly. Because if you do that, you very often will get serial murderers to tell you about what they've done and other things that haven't necessarily come to your attention.
Is that because, and we hear this a lot when we watch these documentaries, is that in a way these serial killers want to be caught? There's a certain pride and excitement from laying out little clues? The general consensus is no. What typically more often happens is they get sloppy as they get away with thinking they're getting away with, their 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 crimes. So they get sloppy, but this actual, I want to get caught, no. But what we do find is, they themselves are wrestling with the reasons why they commit these crimes. And if, it's not like someone who's a bank robber or a hijacker. Those are often people who are known in the community. They can brag about what they've done. But for these people who are wrestling with these issues, the first time they could often talk to someone about what they've done is once they've been arrested. And hence the imperative to get properly trained people with serial investigation experience who understand the mindset of the serial murderer to interview them in the right way. You can't just take any old cop and let them interview this person or someone who's good at housebreaking offenders. This is not a housebreaker. This is a psychologically motivated crime, and you need to understand the psyche of the offender before you set foot into that interview room. Otherwise, you've lost already. In fact, you've said this now a few times, and you say it's so important to get the right person to do the interviews. What is the right way, then, to interview a serial killer, potential serial killer? Well, obviously, we don't want to give away all of our tips to advise the next one who might get arrested. But essentially, it's firstly, knowing what you're dealing with and the general motives for these types of crimes. You would then want to look at the crime scene and deduct as far as possible, what did he do to these victims? Were there elements of torture? Then we think about sadism. What were the sort of potential driving motives behind this individual? Then you want to try and find out as much as possible about them before you even interview them. And then, of course, you bring all that knowledge and experience into building up some kind of a rapport with the offender before you even touch on the actual incidences themselves.
It's interesting, you were mentioning about previous convictions or previous brushes with the law. In connection with this suspect, linked to only one of these murders at this stage, apparently he was charged with rape in 2021, but that case was withdrawn, which is perhaps, as you say, that might be another tick indicating there's something to look into with him. Is there always a link with sexual gratification? With serial killers, is it always about some sort of warped sense of sexual gratification, the killing?
Well, what we can say is that based on our research and experience, the overwhelming majority of serial murderers, at least in South Africa, are motivated by some sexual element, or there's a sexual component to their crime. So there's typically going to be a rape and a murder, not just, for example, a murder. So that is quite common throughout the world. We definitely see that here. You do get other ones. We saw, for example, last year, Rosemary Mdlovu, that SAPS member from Tembisa, who was having numerous people murdered for the insurance payout. So her motive, of course, would have been something quite different. Yeah. It doesn't mean they're not a serial murderer. They might just not be the typical one that we're used to, the Jeffrey Dahmers, the Moses Sitoles, and the various other ones we've had in South Africa. But very common in South Africa that there's going to be a sexual element. And often some animosity or anger built up towards women in general. In this case, it might have been some anger or animosity specifically to sex workers that could have been built up over interactions with sex workers that didn't go well, or whatever the case may be. That might be the surface issue. But, a lot of people have challenges, difficult relationships, problems with women, but, we don't go out and kill people. So it's a surface explanation. It's probably the final straw that breaks the camel's back to push him over into doing these things. But there would have to be this inherent underlying motive and desire, which we don't quite understand yet in an individual for them to go out ultimately and do this.
I've got to ask you about the news we received yesterday that a suspect's been arrested in connection with this case of serial arson, that there's been someone for the last 2 years going around the wealthy suburbs of Johannesburg setting fire to houses. He's been caught on CCTV footage, wandering through people's homes, then setting fires. The suspect was arrested in Emmarentia here in Johannesburg yesterday. Does setting fires often link to other more serious serial crimes? I mean, could that be like a starter crime for a serial murderer?
So, no, well, definitely not in South Africa, and I don't think throughout the world. Your serial arsonist, like what we see here, which is perhaps more of, again, a psychological motive. The majority of arson cases it's to cover up another crime, such as you've committed a murder, then you set fire to the place to destroy evidence, or very often the most common motive would be insurance fraud. But this type of what this appears to be, which was more just the fire being part of some desire to cause fire, is not very common. And that's very, very unusual when it comes to serial arson, to find such a thing. But of course, the danger with fire is you don't control it once you set it. So we do have one person who died as a result of this fire. So therefore, definitely quite early on, they should have been worried about potential death in this scenario. In these types of scenarios, because, as I said, if you're locking people inside a house and setting fire, you have to look at that at least, if anything, as an attempted murder if they survive. And in a way, this is a bit of a failure on the police's side. This was going on for 2 years. Was this properly coordinated? And what you see here, I think it was Fidelity, the sort of a security company that seems to have actually taken a bigger lead in actually saying, guys, this is an issue. We think these are the same, kind of sort of putting out the reward, etc., which might be what we're seeing in the future, where more partnerships, or I don't know how much of a willing partnership it was between SAPS and the private security companies, but that's probably the reality, is that as the police's abilities and capabilities are decreasing, that the private security companies are going to do more and more of probably the initial investigations of crimes and linkage of crimes.
Yeah, you make such a good point, and we are seeing the private sector stepping up in so many different areas as government is not able to do what it's supposed to. Fascinating insights you've given us this evening. Thank you so much, Professor Gerard Labuschagne, an author of the Profiler Diaries, and also, I saw it on his bookshelf, Profiler Diaries 2. So there's even more to read from Professor Gerard Labuschagne on the issue of serial killers. Now, still to come.